Hello guys, welcome back to learning Solidity. In this video I'll show you how to call smart contract using the call method. The call method is a low-level function available to all address data type in Solidity. It can be used to call existing functions in a smart contract or to trigger the fallback method in a smart contract. So we'll create two contracts right now, contract A and contract B. So contract B will be calling the contract A methods. So in contract A we need a function. So in contract A we've declared a state variable which we called A, and we created a function called increment, which increment the state variable using the parameter passed to increment method. Since we'll be attempting to call contract A fallback method, we'll declare two fallback method, the fallback method and the receive fallback method. So if you don't understand what the receive fallback method is, you can check my video on fallback methods. So that's all for contract A. We'll go over to contract B and try calling contract A increment method. In contract B, we'll create a function that calls the increment method, and since the call method is a low-level function of address data type, we need the address of the contract A, which we'll get from the inputs, which we'll get from the argument up here, and we'll input the value which we use to update our contract A state variable. And then what we have to do is to use the address and use the address.call, and in here we have to specify the function signature we're trying to call. So we can do that using the abi.encode signature. So this abi.encode signature takes multiple parameters, multiple arguments. The first argument is the function header and the second are the parameters. So in the first one, it has to be in a string. In the first argument, we will input the contract A signature we're trying to call. The function we're trying to call is increment, and we need to specify the parameter types, and we have to specify them in full, because when initializing our function we use uint, but uint is a short form for uint 256, so we have to specify it in full right here. We'll write uint 256. The next parameters are the arguments of the function we're trying to call, but since our increment function takes only one argument, we just have to pass in one value here. But since we are getting A from the call increment method, we can just pass in the variable A right here. By default, the call method transfers all gas to the function it's trying to call, but we can specify the gas using the .gas attribute of the call method, and in the parentheses we can pass in the amount of gas we are willing to send to the smart contract, and also we can pass in the value using the .value. But in this case, we just transfer whatever the user sends to the smart contract, so we'll transfer the total value, which is the smg.value. So we'll create two functions to trigger the fallback methods, because there are two ways to trigger the fallback method, which is why when using the call method you have to be very careful. So if we should make a mistake in the function signature, like the name of the function, it will trigger the fallback method just like this here. So instead of writing increment, we wrote increment without the t. Once we call this function, it will trigger the fallback method. So the second way of triggering the fallback method is to not specify any signature to the call method. So just passing in a string will trigger the fallback method too. I'll make the state variable to be public so that we can see the changes occurring in our deploy tab. Before we deploy this contract, you need to know that the call method returns two value, which is the result of the transaction and the return value of the contract of the function we called. So the first value is a boolean, which is true or false if the transaction was successful. So the second value is the result in bytes of the function we are trying to call. So if a function is returning a value, we'll get it in the second parameter of this call function. If the transaction is successful, the success will be true. If not, it will be false. So we can use an if statement to know when the transaction completes using the call method. Also, the results data which the call method returns will be the return value of the contract we're trying to call. But in our contract right here, increment doesn't return a value, so that will be an empty byte. Next, we'll deploy the two contracts, and in contract B, in contract A, once we check the public variable, it's 0. Once we come to contract B, we need the address of contract A, which we'll copy and paste in here. Then the second parameter, we'll give it as 12. And once we call this function, it should change. 0 was that the gas we specified for the contract to change its state variable was too little and it could not complete the transaction. So I'll remove the gas here, or you can just increment it, but we'll remove the gas. And we'll try deploying this contract again. Copy contract A address, paste it in contract B, call increment function, and also pass in an argument to the function. And let's see if this works right now. If we should check the A state variable, it should be 2, and here as you can see it works correctly. The gas was a problem in the previous deployed contract. So let's try triggering the fallback functions. We'll trigger the first fallback function, which is the fallback function, using the first method here. And it should trigger the fallback method itself. While the second method to trigger a fallback function will trigger the receive fallback function. So as you can see, the first fallback method will initialize 8 to 12, while the second will initialize 8 to 13. And if you're still confused about these terms, these two fallback functions, you can check the description. I have a link to a video that explains this better. When trying to call functions that exist in a smart contract, make use of the inheritance, the previous method which we did, which was the inheritance or typecasting method. But when trying to call a fallback function, you can make use of the call method. So that's all for this video. In the next video, we'll talk about delegate calls. If you have any questions, comment, feedback, leave it in the comment section below. Thanks for watching. Do have a good day, and I'll see you in the next video.